Hello and welcome to this exercise tutorial for Illustrator CS6. We're going to draw this fusion reactor infographics here, and I am going to get started right away. Ctrl N to create a new file. I'm going to choose an A4 size in landscape orientation. This gives us a blank artboard here, and I'm going to start off by drawing a rectangle. It's going to be the basic cross section of the tokamak reactor shape, and I'm going to choose a transparent stroke, so no stroke for this, and a light gray fill color for now. I'm going to press V to go back to this selection tool here. And now I am going to add two extra anchor points besides the four that we already have for the rectangle. So I'll use the add anchor point tool here. And I'm going to add one here and one here. I'm switching to the direct selection tool using the A key. And I'm just going to move these anchor points slightly to the left to get that basic shape that we need, which maybe looks roughly like so. We can stylize this to have round corners. So I'm going to go to Effect, Stylize Round Corners. We click on Preview to see what we're actually doing, and then I'm going to try maybe 10, maybe it's a little bit too much actually. 5 millimeters in my case probably is more like something that looks useful. So that's great. I am going to duplicate this shape twice just by alt dragging it with the selection tool here. Just going to go like this. I'm going to have different colors for these. I'm going to make one red, and I'm going to make the other one a blue, just so we can distinguish them for now. And then I kind of want to have this blue one here centered to the gray one, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to click Shift and Alt while I do this resizing here with the selection tool. And you can also zoom in using Control Shift and then just dragging like so. And I want to make sure that the width of the border here is kind of constant. So I'm keeping Alt pressed just to drag this up a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing here with the red one. Just trying to center it here, and then I make it smaller with the Alt and Shift keys pressed. And again, I need to compensate a little bit for the smaller height here by just doing the vertical axis by keeping Alt pressed. So this red shape will actually be subtracted from the other two shapes. Let me save this just for now so we have something to get back to if necessary. I'm just going to call that Reactor. So, and now I am going to use the Pathfinder tool over here. We want to use this divide function of the Pathfinder. And now you can see that this object actually has turned into a group. So we can first ungroup it using the object ungroup or Control-Shift-G. And now I'm simply going to delete my red shape, and we are left with a little hole here, which is exactly what we wanted. Next, I'm going to draw the orange ellipse here that will be revolved using the 3D revolve function into the plasma part, this orange donut-shaped thing here. So for now, I'm just going to draw an ellipse, which is under the rectangle tool menu here. So I'm selecting the ellipse tool, and I'm drawing an ellipse, again keeping Alt pressed. perhaps like so. I'm gonna make this a orange fill color for now. And then we are going to select our three shapes here and group them. And in the next step, we will use the special 3D tool, which is under Effect 3D Revolve. So here we have several options that we can choose. For this particular exercise, I'm going to choose the following angles. I also clicked on preview here so we can see what we're actually doing. We're going to start here with -20, and then the other three will be 0. Sorry, the other two will be 0. I'm actually going to unclick preview just for now, so it's going to be a little bit faster for you guys. We do not want 360, we only want 180 degrees of an angle here. And then we'll also need a little bit of an offset. I'm just going to put in 50 points for now, and let's see how that looks like. I'm going to click on preview again. That looks pretty reasonable. You can vary the parameters here a little bit. I think for now I'm just going to stick with this. Maybe a little bit here, more here for the offset. That looks pretty reasonable for me. I can also go to more options and then increase the number of blend steps here just to make things look a little bit nicer. So I just put that to 50. And we're going to stick with that for now. This looks pretty good. Let me actually save this. So as you might have noticed here in our original graphics, we also have a little bit of a glow for the plasma. So let's try to recreate that. There's various ways how we can do this. I'm going to go back into my original group here just to select the ellipse. So I'm copying the ellipse using Ctrl+C while having it selected. I'm gonna just do some multiple clicks here on the blank part of the page to get back outside. And then I make sure to press Ctrl+V, not inside a group here. So I have my little additional ellipse here. I'm just going to manually place it in front of the 3D revolved ellipse. And now we have two ways how we can make this a glow. The first one would be to add an effect here. There is one that's called Effect Stylize Outer Glow. So we can try this first. I'm going to turn on the preview here. Make sure that you change the color to an orange. If you want to be super exact, you would choose exactly the same orange. For the sake of speed, I'm just going to choose any orange for now, basically. And you can see that we're getting a little bit of a glow here. You can change the blur parameter and see what happens. You can also change the blend mode here. Sometimes screen is a good option, sometimes just a normal one is a good one. I'm going to go stick with screen for now. I am not that happy with how this looks. We could do this a couple of times and put several ellipses on top of each other, but another thing that we can do is we can just blur the entire shape and not just do an outer glow. So you would go to Effect, Blur, and then do a Gaussian blur here. I'm gonna put on the preview. 10 pixels looks reasonable for me. Feel free to play with these parameters. Maybe something like 15 is good as well. I'm gonna hit OK here, and you can see we kind of get this glow around the plasma. And I'm just going to drag this over here, and I keep shift pressed and alt pressed. So the alt is going to generate a copy, and the shift makes sure that I don't have any vertical deviation here. So I'm just going to put that here. So my plasma kind of glows on both sides. So basically we are done with the basic shape of the reactor. Now I am going to draw these two extra elements here. The first one is this improved heating device for microwaves, and the second one is this neutral beam injection. And note how I kind of fade this into white here, because in reality it would be a lot longer, but we don't really have the space to show all of that. So I'm going to introduce you to the concept of a transparency mask. Let's get started with the microwave thing first. I need to draw 3 rectangles for that. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here again using Control and Space, and then just drag. And I think I said Control and Shift last time. Sorry, I actually meant Control Space for zooming. And you can also do Control Space Alt for zooming out, and then just Control Space for zooming in. So I'm going to draw a rectangle here that has the same width as the border of this reactor. I'm not going to worry about the colors for now. I'm going to Shift Alt drag that one out here. I'm just kind of varying the shapes here, always just using the simple selection tool. And then maybe we need a third one here. Again, Shift and Alt. Sorry, only using Alt. I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller. Maybe something like this. So now we can also set the stroke color. I'm going to click X to bring the stroke color here to the front. I'm just going to make that a black stroke. That's maybe a little bit too thick, so let's choose 0.5 points here. And now we need to do the fill color, and we're not going to just use a uniform color. We're going to use a gradient here to make it look a little bit more 3D. You can also just click on this white-black gradient swatch here first. Sorry, I need to make sure that my fill color is here in the foreground, and then I'm going to go to this gradient. So we need to customize this a little bit. First of all, we need to turn this by 90 degrees. So we get a vertical gradient, and then I'm going to add a third point here to this gradient. I'm going to choose that one to be roughly 2/3 maybe, in this gradient definition tool. So I'm going to choose a very dark gray for these outer 2 points, the gradient slider, and then something that's a little bit brighter here. And you can also vary the midpoints here. Feel free to adjust this to your liking. I'm going to go with something like this. I can make this maybe a little bit brighter. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I am going to use the eyedropper tool by either clicking I or by selecting it over here. Then I'm just going to click on that object. For some reason, it might even be a bug. The angle does not get copied properly, so I need to do that manually. And the same thing, oops, sorry about that. The same thing over here. I'm using the eyedropper tool just to copy the style of this element. And again, I'm adjusting the angle manually to the 90 degrees here. So let's zoom out a little bit. Yeah, this looks pretty reasonable. We can maybe, if you want, you can group those 3 by just doing Ctrl G, and then we can also maybe move it up a tiny bit, like that. I'm going to go inside my group by clicking into it a couple of times, and I'm going to go steal one of those by doing Ctrl C, going back out the group, and Ctrl V, and then zooming in a little bit here. And this one, the second one, the neutral beam injector, is going to be long and skinny. So now you might also notice when you actually scale objects that your stroke thickness and other effects might get scaled might get changed as you scale the object. So you can see all those three here have 0.5, which is what we set them to, right? But now I just scaled this object, which initially started out with 0.5, but now it changed as well. So now I kind of have to manually put this back to 0.5. The way to prevent that from happening is you can select your object, and then you can go to Object Transform Scale. So now we're not actually going to scale it, we're just going to untick this Scale Strokes and Effects option, which is sort of hidden here inside the Scale menu. So when we untick that, I can now scale this shape without actually changing the stroke thickness. So just going to revert that for now. So let's do this, make this maybe a little bit longer, like so. But now, as you saw here in the finished version, we're not going to show all of it. We're just going to hint that it's actually longer than it is. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the transparency mask option here. First, I'm going to create a rectangle just inside my normal working space here without a stroke, clicking X, choosing a transparent stroke, clicking X again, and here I am going to use a gradient actually, only with 2 points and an angle of 0 degrees, and I'm going to choose black here for one of those and white here for the other one. And for the black, I actually need to make sure that I'm really using a black. So let me switch to RGB here, and as you can see in RGB I'm not actually at 0, 0, 0. So I'm going to make sure that I am. Great, and I'm also going to, let me leave this like this for now and see how this fares within the transparency mask. So we're Control Xing this to the clipboard. I'm selecting the object where I want the mask, and I go to transparency. Whenever you have a menu item here that doesn't show up, just go to Window and activate it here. I started off by clicking Workspace Essentials. Your workspace might look different, but that's fine. Just if something is missing, try to toggle the visibility of the menu items here in this window menu. Anyway, so I have my object selected. I'm going to click on Make Mask here under the Transparency tab, and it went away. So I'm going to click Clip here for now so I can actually see what I'm doing. And now this did not work. I have to make sure that I'm inside my map. So I clicked here on this white square, which is how the mask looks like currently. And now I'm doing the Control V to paste that little black-white gradient thing that I created earlier. And essentially what it does now is it's no longer in our real figure space, Illustrator space here. We're now working inside this mask, and whenever we have a black, basically 100% black is going to mask the visibility of the object, and white, 100% white is basically 100% opacity. So now, as you saw, I just rotated it this way, and we can also elongate it that way. And now I'm just basically manipulating that object that we introduced earlier. We probably do not want the whole thing to be that long, maybe something like this only. And now you can actually still modify that gradient of this object here, and you can choose how that gradient should look like, and thus directly control the opacity of the object where the mask is attached to. I think something like this looks like, I actually want to kind of align where this object ends and then where this object ends as well. So now let's see, when we go back here and click Clip, it's not really going to do the trick. But I think the easiest is just to leave this for now and just make the actual item here shorter. So now make sure you actually go back to normal, what I call normal Illustrator space, by clicking here. Otherwise you're still stuck inside that local transparency mask. So now I'm back to this normal space, and I can simply scale this to maybe about that size. We're going back to the mask, and now we need to kind of compensate for what we did here. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I could spend hours on this just perfecting it. So like this, I'm going back outside of the mask and I'm gonna hit save. So to wrap up these two devices here, we can label them. And to label them, I'm going to create a new layer. So when I have all my text in a separate layer, this kind of makes our work a bit easier. And then I'm going to the type tool here by either clicking T or just selecting it here. And I'm going to write what that is. This is going to be the improved electron cyclotron resonance heating. Let me zoom out a bit. I'm just dragging the artboard around by keeping space pressed, and then the cursor changes into this hand tool, which you might not see that well on the video. I'm just going to put that here, and I'm going to Shift-Alt drag this down here. And here I can do, once I'm inside the text box, I just do Ctrl-A and type the new text to overwrite the old text. This is going to be the neutral beam injection with non-ionized deuterium. I can click Escape to go back to my previously selected tool. And yeah, so I now have a text layer here that I can also rename. You can just double click here, this layer 2, and you can say this is text. I'm going to do the same here, but this time I'm going to call it graphics. So now you can toggle the visibility of your layers. You can also toggle whether they should be locked. So let's say I want to select stuff without accidentally selecting the text. I can lock my text layer, and now I can select things and make sure that only stuff from the graphics layer will get selected. The next thing I want to do is create a little shadow here for my reactor. I actually wanted to do that earlier, but I just thought of it now. So I'm going to select the reactor here in the graphics layer, and then again we're going to go Effect, Stylize, and Drop Shadow. A new dialog is going to pop up here. Let me select Preview so I can see what I'm doing. And again here, choose whatever you think looks best. I am going to do, let's see what that does. My notes here say 40% opacity, and then a X offset of, let's see. What happens if we put 30? And then over here I'm going to put 50. And then I'm going to make this pretty blurry so it's a little less, visible. I think the offsets are a little bit too big now. Kind of depends on the scale of things that you start off with. Maybe I can do something like this. That looks pretty reasonable to me. Feel free to change these parameters, and whatever works for you. You can also change the blend mode over here. I'm just going to stick with normal for now. I'm going to hit OK, and there is the shadow. And now what you notice is the shadow is slightly towards the right, whereas the light of my 3D Revolve clearly shows that the light source is kind of coming from the upper right, and now the shadow looks like the light would be coming from the upper left. So we either need to change the offset of the shadow or the actual source of the light for the 3D shape. I'm going to modify the light position for the 3D revolve, so I'm going to click on my shape, my revolved shape, and you can see here under appearance the styles that we applied are all shown here. So I can double click 3D revolve and go back to the parameters that we had here, and I can drag around my light source here. I'm going to put it to the top left, and now the shadow and the light should actually look more aligned. Yeah, I guess something like this looks a bit more reasonable. Maybe now the light is a bit too high, so let me change that back. Sorry, I need to select this shape here. I'm going to go to this 3D revolve again, and maybe I can just put this down a little bit. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, this looks more reasonable now. I'm pretty happy with this result. So now we're going to work on these isotopes here, elements that are being injected. Let's first do this lithium pipe here. I'm going to zoom in a bit here. We're going to do this using a rectangle, perhaps something like this. And now the unfortunate thing is I cannot just use the eyedropper or the same swatch color here that I used before, because of the lighting that's been applied to the 3D revolve. So you can see because of this shadow, it's a little bit, this blue is a little bit darker than its original generating blue. So I need to adjust that manually. I'm just going to go to this color tab, and I am going to choose, sorry, let me just drag this in so you can actually see it. I'm going to choose hue, saturation, and blackness here to vary my colors. And I'm going to just make this darker until I can no longer visually tell a difference here. You can click on Ctrl H and then while you keep Ctrl pressed, the actual bounding box here is going to vanish, so you can see whether it really blends in nicely color-wise. That looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it like this. Let me press Ctrl H again so we actually do get a visible bounding box. Zooming out using Ctrl Alt space. It's maybe a little bit too thick. So I'm just making this skinnier again using keeping Alt pressed. So let's also do this arrow to indicate the direction of flow. There's various ways how I could do this. Since I'm not really doing a stroke thing here, I'm just going to construct my own geometry for the arrow. We could, for example, start off with a square using the rectangle tool and shift dragging the mouse here. I can create a little square, and then with my square I can select one arrow using the direct selection tool. So I clicked A to get to the direct selection tool. I click on one anchor, I select one anchor, I hit delete to get rid of that. I go back to the selection tool, the normal one, and I shift rotate it by 45 degrees, so I get this triangle shape that I can just drag anywhere now. It's maybe a little bit too big, so we can actually resize it again using Alt and Shift to something like this maybe. And then I'm going to do the same here for the deuterium. This time the tube is going to be a little bit longer, such that it actually indicates that it's being fed into the plasma. I'm going to select those two shapes here, and I just Shift Alt copy them over here, and I'm scaling this one here just in the vertical direction, and I select both of these, and I'm going to choose a red fill color. And you also notice that I did this little blend thing here, such that the orange of the plasma and the actual deuterium here, that they sort of blend into each other. And again, I guess we could use a gradient for that. This time I used something called a blend shape, so I'm going to show you how I did that. I'm going to zoom in here, and then we are going to create a ellipse that should have roughly maybe the width of this deuterium pipe. So maybe something like this. And then we can move it here. Should these two midpoints align? And then I'm simply gonna Alt drag this over here to create a new one. So let me just color this one green for now, so we actually see that we're dealing with a separate shape. And I'm going to scale this up a bit, maybe to something like this. And now what I want to do is I actually want to have this red one in front of the green one. So what I usually do to do that, you could either go right click and then you can say arrange, bring to front. So this is the frontmost object now in this graphics layer. So now we can maybe arrange them in this way. And now I'm going to select these two ellipses. I'm going to change that one now to orange. So I'm just going to use the eyedropper here to make that orange. And I have both of them selected, and I go Object, Blend, Make. So this kind of creates a gradient between those two objects. And you see the oranges here. I mean, the two variations of the orange color don't exactly match up. I'm not going to deal with that right now. We could just insert another bigger orange ellipse of the same actual orange hue. But I think for now that is good enough. Just zooming out to see how this looks. Yeah, this looks pretty good to me. If you want, you can Shift Alt this arrow icon down here, so we have another one down here. So this looks pretty good. In very analogous ways, you would actually now create the tritium and the helium pipes. I'm not going to do those just for the sake of brevity, because with what you've learned so far, you would already know how to do that. So let me move on. I'm going to create these little nucleus atom cores here, icons. So I'm going to draw those a little bit too large first, but then we can always scale them down. So let me maybe start with the deuterium, which has one proton and one neutron. So for that, I'm actually going to use the blend shapes again. So I just created this red sphere here. I'm Alt dragging it to copy it, and then I'm scaling this one down to a tiny size with a white fill. And again, let's remember that our light is coming from the top left. So in order to be consistent with the physics here, I'm going to move this specular highlight, which it will be after the blend, here to the top left, something like this. I'm going to go Object, Blend, Make, just like we did before. And this kind of looks like a 3D spherical thing. I kind of need two of those now. I'm just going to, before I copy them, let me make sure that this outer one actually has a stroke. Again, 1 point is a little bit too thick, so let's choose maybe 0.5. So I want to make sure that we have two discernible ones, one for the proton and one for the neutron. I'm just copying the sphere here by Alt dragging. So I'm going to make this red. I just click a few times such that I have this outer bigger red sphere selected. I'm going to make sure that this fill color here is a darker red of the same hue, maybe something like this. And this one here actually is lighter. So we can make sure that our blackness here is at 0 and that the saturation also is a bit lower. So this looks brighter. That one is actually almost too brown now for my liking. So I'm going to select this one again and lighten things up here. And let me actually make this one lighter. Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. So now let me maybe arrange them this way, make sure they're actually horizontally aligned. So obviously this is going to be a bit too large still. We can scale it down in a second. I'm just keeping Alt and Shift press here. You can also group those, so we make sure that we don't accidentally separate them. So this one here is my deuterium. I am just going to Alt drag one of these text boxes to copy them. So this is deuterium, and we can position this box here close to the actual atom. And then in a very analogous way you would create these other icons for lithium and tritium and helium. I'm going to leave those out for the sake of brevity. Let's take a look how we can create one of these inserts here, one of these boxes. Let's maybe do the fusion process here, at least part of it. So you can see I'm sort of showing a white rectangle in here, and then there's this shape here that sort of indicates a zoom out, and then the fusion process is described here in detail. So we need to create a rectangle somewhere here in the plasma. Yeah, something like that might be cool. I want a transparent fill, and I want a white stroke. And I think 1 point is actually pretty good for what I want to do here. So the next thing we need is a larger box down here. Maybe I'm just going to use that same shape. So I'm alt dragging it here, and then obviously I'm going to scale it up to something like this. So now this sort of background shape for the inset for the box, for example, what we could do, we could choose a white background. So I'm just going to switch stroke and fill, and I'm going to choose a gray stroke here. Maybe something like that. And then it would be nice if that's a little bit transparent actually, so you can see that here's just a tiny hint of the shadow of the reactor is still visible. That's optional, but I'm going to set that to a opacity maybe of 40%, such that it's still clearly visible as a bounding box. Maybe only 0.5 points for the stroke. Might look a bit smoother. Great, so this is this box. Now we need something that, you know, looks like it's going to zoom out from and connect these two rectangles. So in order to do that, I am going to just modify this rectangle here. So I'm Shift Alt dragging it out to here, and I'm going to adjust the shape by using the direct selection tool. So I just clicked A. I am going to select one of these anchors here, and I drag that out to here. Same thing with this other anchor over here. And now we can change these settings here to, I'm going to swap fill and stroke, and I'm going to choose a light gray here, and then a really low opacity. Maybe we can try something like 25. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, it seems pretty reasonable. For some reason, you can see that now all these items accidentally got into our text layer because I wasn't being careful. So I'm going to select all these three. I'm hitting Ctrl X to cut them. I'm switching layers by just selecting this graphics layer, and I do Ctrl F, which is a special way of pasting things. It's basically pasting while pasting things in front, so keeping the original positions constant. So now these three objects here are the three topmost items in the graphics layer, which is exactly what we wanted. Great. So now we can actually work on the details here. The only really new thing is how to make this sort of sun image that just represents fusion and the lines with arrows. So I am just going to alt drag my deuterium here, which is going to sit in the lower left corner. And then one way of creating this fusion symbol. Now you might notice that this is actually, my deuterium is actually underneath the box, which is not really what we want. So let me just go back this step where I drag the item, and I'm just going to actually copy it, Ctrl C, and then I can do Ctrl F to paste it in front, and now I'm going to drag it. For some reason it still looks very light. Okay, that's better. So I'm going to position that here. And then for that little sun icon, I'm choosing the ellipse tool. I can go to the middle of the square here. So also now if we need to select details here within the square, and we actually do not want to be able to select the square, I'm going to select it and I'm going to lock it. So you can go to Object, Lock, Selection, or Ctrl 2. And now this object is no longer selectable, which is sometimes a useful trick. So here I'm holding Alt and Shift pressed and I create a circle. Again, I just use the eyedropper for my orange. And now we can create this kind of zigzag effect that I applied here. It looks like sun rays by going to Effect. Sorry, I always have to look up where this one is actually. Distort and Transform Zigzag. Yes, that's it. So we get a new dialog window here. We click on Preview. And then again here we just kind of play with the settings. We don't want it to be too large, but we might want a little bit more of these ridges per segment. So just choose whatever you like best. I'm going to go for these settings over here. You hit OK. And we also want to indicate motion here. So I'm going to click on the line segment tool and I'm going to draw a line starting from this deuterium into this fiery fusion ball. So now I technically drew a line. It has 0 stroke width, so I need to change that. Just click X to bring that to the front, and then I can click maybe like a medium gray. So I'm going to leave 1 point stroke width for now, but we need that arrow shape. And you go to stroke. So here we also have options for creating a dashed line, but right now we're mostly interested in creating an arrow shape. I always recommend using the most basic ones possible. For example, something like this one. It looks pretty good. If the arrowhead is a bit too big, you can scale it down maybe to 2/3 of the original size, like that. And this gives you an easy way to draw arrows. You can also switch the ends by clicking on this icon here to swap start and end of the arrowheads. And the last thing I want to show you in this video is just how to create these 3 kind of wavy lines here that represent the microwaves that are being injected into the system. So we're going to use the line segment tool again. We can start out with a straight line. Let me zoom in here using Control and space. I'm going to draw a line keeping the Shift key pressed from this injector into the plasma. I'm going to make that with a white stroke to have more contrast. We will need an arrow here, an arrowhead here again. Maybe again that's a little bit large, so I'm going to scale it to 66%. But now we also want to make sure that it is a dashed line, so we can activate it here. And I'm going to just choose maybe 4 points here. Feel free to make your settings different from mine. That looks pretty good. We can also vary the settings here. Sorry, actually I meant to click on this. So now you can see this kind of defines where the dashes and the gaps actually start. I like this option here better. And now we need to apply this zigzag shape again to our path. So we can go to Distort and Transform and then go to Zigzag. But this time we want to make it be more smooth than it was last time. So I'm going to go for the smooth options. This is a little bit too much for my liking. Let me tune that down. Again, the size is a bit too large still. Maybe 3 segments. Yeah, that looks reasonable. I hit OK, and then I guess since we had 3 of those, we can simply, okay, now I don't know what I did. I must have somehow gotten into this group. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to just Shift Alt drag this to get 3 copies. And these are my microwaves. So for all the other missing elements that I haven't drawn that are part of this final figure, you could actually proceed very analogously like I've shown you so far. I don't think there's any new elements involved, so I am going to stop here, and I hope you enjoy exploring Illustrator further, and let me know if you have questions. Thank you.